Okay, it's beeping at me, but hopefully it's working. Right, yeah, good morning, everyone. So we can't remember what week we are in now. Is it 17? Okay, so we're getting towards sort of midway through term two. So in the grand scheme of things, we're going to finish off lighting today. We're going to do texture mapping on Friday's lectures. And then that just leaves us two topics to go. Bezier curves, which is to do with assignment 11, and fractal landscapes, which is assignment 12. So in the next couple of weeks, we'll probably finish everything in this unit, and we're going to go through, we're going to put on all the lectures after that will be just focused on revision. So we're going to revisit all the stuff we did in term one, which hopefully you haven't all forgotten. Killian may be coming back for a few of those as well. So we're going to give you plenty of revision to do. Right, so shading methods, this essentially carries straight on from what we did on Friday. And just to recap, in case you had a hard weekend. Okay, Friday we looked at a direct illumination model. There are two general types of ways to do lighting in graphics. Okay, the sort of more accurate and therefore the more computationally intensive model is to do what we call indirect illumination. So this means, as well as light reflecting off of surfaces and going to the viewer, as well as that being catered for, we also deal with indirect illumination. That's where light bounces off of other objects. Okay, you can get reflections, shadows, things like that going on. Okay, so the global model deals with both direct and indirect. That's too computationally expensive in, for example, a computer game. A computer game has to update the monitor every 60 frames, every 60th of a second. So dealing with all of the sort of inter-object reflection and all those light rays bouncing around will be too computationally expensive. So we simplify it. So we only deal with direct illumination in indirect models. Global models such as ray tracing, they're fine. I mean, they're used in things like movies, but for computer games, we tend to use direct illumination models. And the one we use is called Fong's reflection model. It's a direct model, so only light from light sources is taken into account. And it combines three different types of reflection: ambient reflection, diffuse, and specular. Caters for attenuation, and that's the further away you get from a light source, the less strong the light will be. So, for example, if you've got a candle and you're, say, 100 meters away from a candle, you're not going to get much light from that candle. So that's to do with attenuation. Okay, so just a quick recap on how we model these. Ambient reflection, this is essentially a very simple model. This says all seen are lit equally. So you have it at general ambient light. So if you've got a dark scene, like an underground scene or a nighttime scene, your ambient light will be low. If you've got a bright daytime scene, all objects will be illuminated quite higher. Okay. All of these models of reflection tends to use a K, what we call a coefficient, a K coefficient. So Ka is A for ambient, so that's the ambient coefficient. These are in the range 0 to 1. You set these to how you want your objects to look. Okay, so Ia is the intensity of the ambient light. Ka is a number between 0 and 1, which just sort of raises or lowers the intensity. Okay, diffuse reflection. This is reflection off of dull, rough surfaces. So if something looks dull, okay, so for example, this carpet on the floor, that's a rough surface. Okay, and what we assume is that light falling on a rough surface is scattered equally in all directions. So here we have our flat surface, okay, and here we have our light source. So we have a vector going from the surface to the light source. Okay, any light which falls on our surface is reflected equally in all directions. So you can see those light rays are going everywhere. The amount of light that is reflected off of this surface is determined by this angle theta. Okay, the smaller the angle, the more light is reflected. If we have a small angle, the light source will be up here somewhere. Okay, so a lot of light is falling on your surface. But as the angle increases, so if we got quite a large angle, so if it's not nearly 90, the light source is over here, and we have less light falling on the surface. Okay, so as the angle gets bigger, the amount of reflected light reduces. Okay, and when the angle is greater than 90 degrees, we have no light falling on the surface. Okay, so we model this using a dot product. So if n is a unit vector, L dot n determines the angle, cosine of the angle, sorry, and the maximum of L dot n and 0 basically ensures that when the angle is greater than 90 degrees, we have 0. IP is the intensity of the point light source. So for example, a light bulb. Okay, so your light source has an intensity of IP. KD is a coefficient in the range 0 to 1. Okay, so that's for rough surfaces. That's for things which look dull. And the final one is shiny surfaces, so things which are smooth. Now, shiny surfaces, the light tends to bounce off. Well, it does bounce off in the same angle as it hits, so it's the angle of incidence. So if this is the angle theta between the light source vector and the normal vector, the reflected angle r, or the reflected vector r, makes the same angle, but just the other side. So your light is going to reflect off in the direction of r. If the viewer vector v, this is where the viewer is looking at the surface from, the closer the viewer is to r, the more light reflected from the light source they should be able to see. Okay, so this angle alpha is the angle between the reflected vector and the viewing vector. The smaller the angle alpha is, the more of the light that the viewer should be able to see. Okay, and Phong used a cosine raised to the power n rule to determine how much light they should be able to see, which can be we can replace the cosine alpha with r dot v. So r is your reflective vector, v is your viewing vector. R dot v raised to the power n gives us how much light the viewer can see. Ks is a number in the range 0 to 1, okay, like KD and KA were, and IP is the intensity of the point light source. So in other words, one of these bulbs would be your point light source. Okay, add them all together. Simply combine ambient, diffuse, and specular together. Add them. I've also included FATT there, which is attenuation. So that's the further away you get from the light source, the less light would fall on the surface. And if you have multiple light sources, which you invariably always do, you just sum the diffuse and the specular terms. The ambient term is set the same for everything, doesn't matter how many light sources you have. But for multiple light sources, you can see we've got a summation over m light sources. So just looking at the ceiling, we've got 12 lights in the ceiling. We've got some light coming in from outside. We've got a light from the projector, some coming in from the window. So if we were to model that, we'd have to deal with all those light sources. That's Fong's reflection model. Okay, it gives us a good approximation of a global model, but a lot more computationally efficient. And there you have the Newell's teapot, okay, with the various components added together. So this one just includes ambient light, so doesn't give us any clues on the shape of the teapot. This one here is just diffuse light, so there's no shiny bits. Okay, but with diffuse, we can see but where the light falls on the front of the teapot, more light is reflected, where I think the light must be coming from somewhere to the right, somewhere down here. Over here, it's more in shadow because less light's being falling on those surfaces. Specular, okay, notice you only see the color of the point light source of specular, like a mirror. You don't see the color of the mirror, you only see the color of the light being reflected. So specular essentially gives us these white bits, the shiny bit. Add them all together, and you get this one down here. By the way, this looks a lot better when I'm viewing it on this monitor than it does on the projector. So check out the electronic versions of the notes or slides if you want to see that in a bit more detail. Okay, so that's a lighting model. Now that deals with an individual point on your surface. So if that deals with an individual point on the surface, we need to fill whole polygons with these lighting models. So that's what we're going to be looking at in this lecture. Okay, and we call these shading models. So we know how to calculate Fong's reflection model for an individual point. How do we use that then to shade in whole polygons? And this is linked to the scanline filling, which we saw on Friday morning. We're going to look at three models. Flat model, one called, by the way, have we got any French speakers here? Because last time we did, and I made a fool of myself by trying to pronounce this guy's name. Okay, I'm going to pronounce it as Gouraud. Okay, apparently it's not that. Apparently the G is the 8th, but I can't do it. So my apologies. If you ever hear somebody else say it, you might be pronouncing it better. But flat or Lambertian shading, Gouraud shading, and Phong shading. So Phong shading and reflection are two different things invented by the same guy. Okay, that's what we're going to look at now. Okay, flat shading. Anybody ever watch MTV? Yeah, we've heard of MTV. Right, I'm going to show my age here. Anybody seen the Money for Nothing video by Dire Straits? No? Ever heard of Dire Straits? Ever heard of Money for Nothing? But you haven't seen the video. Okay. Well, they used very sort of primitive. Well, it was actually at the time it was cutting edge, but computer graphics to do the video to that. And they had a like a robot. It was like a robot man type thing walking along in the video, and it was lit using flat shading. So that was what I was trying to. Check it out on YouTube. Okay. The music might not be to your taste, but just mute it and have a look at the video. But they use flat shading. And what it does is very simply, it assumes that all pixels in a polygon are lit equally. Okay, so a polygon is going to be flat. So all pixels in a polygon is going to have the normal vectors facing in the same direction. So therefore, we assume that all pixels have the same reflection. So quite simply, you calculate the reflection model for a single point on the polygon, and you assume all the other points on the polygon are lit the same. So what I've got here is a function in MATLAB called peaks. Now I've just used it to create some 3D surface. It doesn't matter what 3D surface you have, I've just used this. Okay, and this is created using 25 by 25 polygons. Okay, so there's 25 polygons in this direction and 25 polygons in that direction. And you can see with flat shading, you can sort of make out the individual polygons. Yeah, it sort of shows up on there. Okay, actually what I'm just going to do is turn the light out so you can see it a bit better. But don't fall asleep. Is that better? You don't need to do any, I'm not going to ask you to do any sort of acting this lecture, so yeah. It's quite important when we see some of the differences here. So as you can see with this flat shading, you can definitely tell that this is made up of polygons. And that's usually a bad thing when it comes to computer graphics. We don't want to be reminded, but we're looking at a group of polygons. When you're watching Frozen or Toy Story or something like that, you don't want to be reminded that you're watching some sort of group of polygons. You want to see the graphics. Okay, so that's relatively poor, but it's easy to do. It's just a scanline filling. And the reason why is it so poor? Well, this is a phenomenon called Mach banding. Now, what I've got here is I've got a bar, and I've shaded this left-hand side of the bar, I've shaded it all black. So this is 100% black. And the right-hand side of the bar is shaded all white. In between, the middle third goes from all white, and this is a gradual shading up to all black. Now, a Mach banding